number 3, which is dedicated to neuroscience and the experience of beauty, mainly, less so architecture. We figured that within a whole conference dedicated to the discourse of architecture, we also need to explain something that is correlated to the subject of architecture, which is, of course, beauty and how beauty functions, and what impact it has on the human being, what makes a space feel beautiful, and why does it matter to live in harmonious surroundings in the first place. So this panel wants to explore beauty not only as a subjective preference, but also, and mainly, as a human need that informs cognition, emotion, health, and social behavior. Drawing from architecture, neuroscience, aesthetics, and sociology, our speakers will examine how built environments influence the brain, how beauty and sensory experience affects well-being, and how design choices can either nourish or deplete the human potential. Our first speaker today is going to be Stefano Serafini, who is a Roman by birth, lives in an ancient village that is inaccessible to cars. He's a philosopher and psychologist. He is the co-founder and research director of the International Society of Bio-urbanism. He's editor-in-chief of the Journal of Bio-urbanism and managing editor of Organisms, Journal of Biological Sciences, which is published by the University of Rome, La Sapienza. He has published numerous studies and has taught in Italy and abroad on environmental psychology, neuroergonomics, and biourbanism at the intersection of philosophy, mind sciences, theory of form, biology, and urban studies. His talk is entitled Bio-urbanism of the Self, Psyche, Life, and the City. Help me welcome Stefano Serafini.
Thank you very much. From the beginning of the 16th century, both urban studies and architecture have been under the influence of a top-down mechanistic worldview, which aims at an endless accumulation of wealth, power, and control. Such a morphing grip on landscape was mild and scattered at the beginning to grow stronger and become almost total between the beginning of last centuries and our time. In this context, bio-urbanism, the application of complexity sciences and phenomenology to urban studies, aims at re-establishing the epistemology and the goal of design. As its name indicates, bio-urbanism serves and enhances life and is based methodologically and epistemologically on what Edmund Husserl called the life world. This makes bio-urbanism, besides a source of naughty and effective criticism of mainstream aesthetics, a human-centered discipline, where the inner experience of life is the pivot of its design. Biophilic, neuroergonomic, and evidence-based design have been tools for such a worldview change. Our work officially started in 2010 with the establishment of the International Society of Bio-urbanism, the publication of a scientific definition of the discipline, and the launch of the peer-reviewed open-access Journal of Bio-urbanism. Scholars from many fields and the public appreciated our dissemination of new urban ideas. However, we used to meet raised eyebrows among architecture professionals and academics. Most of that skepticism was in reality a defense against our assessment of current built environment. Our criticism of ugliness, functional failure, social injustice, environmental harm, and health damages brought about by architecture and urban design was common sense to people, but made most professionals uneasy, with the honorable exception of classicists and new urbanist members, because they could not stand to be part of the problem. The term bio-urbanism, biophilic design, and neurodesign have become fashionable among architects in the last few years. However, no structural change has accompanied the adoption of these sexy words as already occurred to ecology, nature, and green. Speaking of bio-urbanism while proposing absurdities such as skyscrapers in the desert, plastic houses for birds on rooftops, North Pole industrial citadels for immigrant workers, labor profiting techniques by design, or words building on human blood, is mere greenwashing, and indeed a grim one. In this contribution, I would like to keep up the good work of Bio-urbanism, which is rehumanizing design from its very roots by moving from the level of the material city to that of meaning and purpose. Focusing on exterior effects, in fact, is of poor use. We rather need to go at the source of the problem, where human intentionality emerges in the psyche. Modern landscape is mechanically simple. One can easily decipher the logic behind its design as heteronomy. Both buildings and cities work as capitalistic machines. Pragmatically, they are meant to be incomplete syntactic maps which exclude that great part of reality that does not fit their tasks. On the contrary, every real good architecture has an organic capability of acting like nature, generously embracing all the needs of our forms of life, from the biological to the spiritual level. This is not a matter of aesthetics, external forms, patterns, or style. Rather, every good architecture and planning feature a deep connection to the wholeness of life. We define bio-urban any design that provides for a language whose semantics is complex enough to cope with the order of life, rather than with its abstraction. In other words, good or bio-urban design realizes the dynamic isomorphism of the phenomenon of life in the built environment, its functions and its patterns. Its criterion is the very life we belong to as users and creators of design, not economic profit, not a political stance, not an aesthetic ideology. As an effect, bio-urban design fits its context, and it nourishes and exalts the specific and different forms of life from which it emerges. The parallel with the inner life of human being is striking. Our global, westernized, modern culture has been increasingly losing pieces of language, reducing the space for human meaning, forms of life, and differences, be them natural, cultural, or psychic. Human life has been mutilated into a flat economic dimension of consumption and production within a multi-scale cage of lust for power, from family life to the wider society. Far from being a matter of personal creed, Max Weber's disenchantment of the world is first and foremost a symptom of linguistic loss. I mean here language as the complex expression of the forms of life with which communities create their words. In this sense, language encompasses speech acts, religion, philosophy, architecture, manners, customs, etc. In short, the entire body of human phenomena. In exchange for a dimension of material power, we have been constantly losing pieces of this language, hence pieces of reality, and our comprehension of the world, which includes ourselves, has increasingly faded. We cultivated the illusion to know more because of our technoscience, while we have been losing the meaning of the world and of ourselves. Like in 1984 by George Orwell, where power struggled to reduce the number of terms that people knew for making their thought more controllable, the vocabulary of our life is shrinking, thus eliminating the possibility of getting the truth that the erased words once indicated. This holds true for ecological niches, decor, food, social manners, crafts, sensorial awareness, and spoken language, and is a cultural anthropological trend. The most interesting aspect of the study by Twenge and colleagues on the decline of vocabulary among North American adults between 1974 and 2016 is that the largest declines occur among the most educated. Clinical practice shows how dramatically such a loss affects the human psyche. Depression, anxiety disorder, non-psychotic psychopathology, incapability to communicate, solitude, spiritual misery, and the sense of impotence affect a skyrocketing number of people in the world, leading to harming behavior, suicide, and even massacres. On the so-called functional band of the spectrum, we observe business people, political leaders, and people of law, almost always supported by intellectuals, devastating our and our planet's health, letting slip the dogs of war, and bringing the world to the brink of destruction. Notably, Ronald Lang showed the divided self, its disconnection from the life world, as a schizoid characteristic of our society. As a psychologist, I'm familiar with the fact that the suffering, non-functional mind can be highly fitting to our society's pyramid of power. I even come to the conclusion that far from being a deviation, nowadays, the only social elevator is a specific form of narcissistic psychopathy. I would rather define it as spiritual sickness. and that an unhealthy leadership self-selection is further narrowing our world language, accelerating the odds of total self-destruction. The effects lie in front of us. As a therapist, I focus on making people go back to the richness of their inner meaning by reconstructing their awareness of being connected to the world, hence to their self. First, one needs to learn the language of the self, which makes the joy of life flourishing again. Then, such a precious meaning can strategically dialogue with the syntactic of power for the sake of surviving. Now, such an individual work also needs a suitable environment, both social and physical. Indeed, the environment can reinforce the saint-centeredness, wholeness, and relationship that one experiences when in the presence of the self. Even the language of the self, in fact, stems from a communitarian form of life, which in turn is rooted by a network of constraints into natural order. There exists an isomorphism between nature, life phenomena, and the human psyche that one can easily intuit by overcoming powerful cultural biases. And its rupture testifies for what I hinted above about the actual condition of the world, as well as that of urbanism and architecture. Let me quickly recap the meaning of the self. We usually associate this term with the conscious mind, often confusing it with our I or ego. If I think of my own self in such a fashion, though, I must admit that the subjective I is trying to observe an objective I, which is therefore no I anymore. The observing mind is always elusively more inside than the observed mind. No matter how much I strive, my inner moment of awareness and subjectivity that sustains every other moment of consciousness is further in the center of my effort and attention, including my body. The self is like the central point of a sphere. The sphere is visible and three-dimensional, but its center has no dimension. And yet, wherever the invisible point is, there the sphere follows. The center and the sphere cannot exist independently from each other. On the contrary, usually the I does not correspond to the center. Its limit is rather the effect of a disconnection from the environment, which interrupts the afference of nourishing information that flows through our life world. The ego, therefore, produces a partial vision of the sphere. The issue is when we interpret such a partial vision as the total vision, which makes us believe that the sphere is distorted. This is always the case when we forget the existence of the center. I'm not speaking of a hypothetical spiritual entity. I limit myself here to interpret the self as the capability of understanding our own wholeness by reflecting the afference of our extended body-mind continuum. The mind, says Gallese, is not a separate identity. Rather, it is a process emerging from the embodied interaction with the world and the others. People centered on their self can listen and give name to their emotions, sensations, feelings, dreams, and thoughts with no or little bias. This means they know where they are. In other terms, they are connected with the world. They can name it, they can see it without blinding themselves with fear, ideology, hurry, and need for control. In classical terms, they have the moral habit of prudence, prudentia in Latin, sophrosune in Greek. A virtue that, according to Aquinas, emerges when one reaches moral harmony. Those who are disconnected from the self tend to be under the influence of the fear of losing their very existence, thus developing strategies of control and power that split them from reality even more. The god Janus, the ancient god of the borders, beginnings, transitions, and passages, may well express the essence of the self. This Roman god represented the center in any border, the invisible interface that unites the beginning and the end, the exterior and the interior, the past and the future. Like the self, Janus is at once a source of holiness and relationship. Relationship, from Latin relatus, past participle, or referre, bringing back, giving back, reporting, means belongingness. It may sound like the opposite of wholeness, which people tend to identify with a certain closure, like a kernel in its own. On the opposite, there is no wholeness without relationship. And in fact, any wholeness is an intertwinement of relations. So the self comes back to speak to us when with humility we re-identify with our body, our skin, our viscera, our emotions, and all those threads that binds us to reality. The self comes to light only through relationship with the other. In the end, the self shows up as a wholeness, which is belongingness. The center of the self comes through in its vital relationship with the surroundings, and this happens within the border, in the body. And sorry for having to be so apodictically short, given the time of my presentation, but imagine transferring these notions to architecture. Professor Jaap Dawson, the author of A House is Not a Thing, say that there exist patterns with the heart. All of you had the experience of the wholeness in front of a built masterpiece. That piece of art, no matter how humble or renowned, speaks to yourself. It indicates yourself. It hints at the wholeness in you, which emerges from a deep connection with your alive surroundings. It makes you feel alive. It suggests you the new words that you had forgotten to make your world rise again from oblivion. Language, landscape, and the city are all substantiated by relationship. They are all built on the commons of semantics. Bio-urban design is therefore intrinsically therapeutic, not just because it enforces evidence-based design or environmental psychology, Ulrich, Keller, Hamilton, but because it mirrors and engages the self. To focus now on the city, let me add that all these terms, the self, relationship, wholeness, are other names for life or love. A generous longing that escapes the monetary order of Baudrillard's Death. The city of the self is generous, happy, and meditative because it is built on relationship and wholeness. It becomes an inspiration and a model of the self for its inhabitants and those who visit it. It does not just contain bodies. It teaches, nourishes, inspires, and provides joys to souls. It does not aim at producing economic value per se, but human value. Wholeness, the way things belong together, has been a major design teaching by Christopher Alexander. He translated in modern language and ancient wisdom, the opposite of the infamous slogan by Rem Koolhaas, "Fuck the context." We used to think of design in terms of form and function, to the point of splitting there, where function responds to quantitative and measurable dimensions and form belongs to the realm of aesthetics. Accordingly, beauty would be a kind of subjective addition to an objective structure, thus revealing an intrinsic conflict. In fact, in bio-urbanism, form and function are the two phases of the same reality, two intentional effects of the designer's focus on a third entity. Alexander told us that a quality without a name generates form and function as a whole. He even proposed bricks that could help such a quality to emerge and called them patterns. Besim Hakim, however, confronted Alexander about the roots of any pattern in design and offered a third layer of comprehension of the intentional dynamic of design, namely historical generative codes. He especially analyzed them at the urban level and collected them by studying the innumerable delightful historical towns that have been harmoniously growing without planners for centuries in the Mediterranean area. Codes are the sedimentation of design, wisdom stemming from communitarian forms of life. But what lays before codes if not customs and ethics? And behind them, I dare to add the natural order, not in the sense of natural law, but of an isomorphy that transverses human behavior, language, biology, and physics. In short, real design allows the intentionality of the life world to speak through the wholeness of its forms and functions. Embodied simulation is the name of the discovery that humans know the world by imitating it through specific nervous paths connected to muscular activity, according to Gallese. This makes the concept of isomorphy standing out. Any design, natural or artificial, brings on an intentionality that affects us. Like in the famous Köhler's work, Takete and Maluma, forms can correspond to sounds, and this makes sense. Soft shapes, graspable tectonics, natural materials may help our belonging and sense of safety. Their geometrical and functional connection to the environment reinforces it, and signifiers from the communitarian language bring such a feeling to a deepest, meaningful level. Cut lines, tilted walls, and cold materials produce defense reactions. Minimalism's aggression against life, wildlife, weeds, the slow, and the weak, alarms our sympathetic system. Isolated from any local language, these forms disorientate us even more. No matter how abstractly familiar its model may have become, a towering skyscraper breaks the scale link with the human body in terms of geometry and cognition, not just symbolically as people used to think. Finally, most of contemporary design likes to make its meaning abstract and difficult to grasp. Such a resistance to users' understanding is a further disconnect that reinforces a numbing experience of our environment. However, humans are still capable of producing good design. I don't refer here to great architects, but to common people, and to that anarchist force that still can express a communitarian life world. From utilization patterns, for example, use as footsteps creating alternative and more functional paths in a park, to shanty towns and historical centers, by urban affordances are all around us. They all have in common the revelation of specific local forms of life, which include environmental, cultural, and existential coping strategies. Let me conclude with a key psychic issue, the connection boundary between self and non-self. In bi-urban terms, this calls for the relationship between the city and the non-city. As Pierpaolo Pasolini well said, the problem of the city's form and the problem of preserving the nature surrounding the city are a single problem. But the problem of respecting the natural boundary between the city's form and the surrounding nature always arises. Modern urbanism has put in crisis precisely this dynamic interface between the urban body and its surroundings. As a cancer, the modern city denies, infiltrates, invades, and destroys the countryside, which instead is supposed to support it. Modern urban bodies are kept alive by means of a faraway global sources of food, energy, and management. This way, modernity has dissolved the vital dynamics between the city and its own surroundings. This has affected also the interactions between the morphology of space and the sociality of its inhabitants at both the microscopic and macroscopic levels. Modern city has broken its own borders, overflowing into an alien countryside that scares it. Like a schizoid ego, it sees the other as an enemy. Urbanites, on their turn, stop understanding the relevance and even the existence of the commons, which were key for both the life of the first cities and of country life. The anthropologist Ernesto De Martino recalls the passing by peasant that fixes the dry wall stone on his way because he feels his own responsibility toward a common value. In modernistic cities, instead, every space is either private or public. The connected glia of commonality has been erased. Mediation is lost. Every space is servant and acts as an enemy to the other. Gallese notices the same process occurs in the body-mind continuum, where mediation is the very ground of experience. On this subject, Alessandro Giuliani, Carlo Modenesi, and I just published a book that focuses on the city as a cultural organism. The self needs the non-self to reveal itself. And the non-self can nourish the self only through a membrane, an axis, an interface that is part of the wholeness of the human being, namely its sensory body. Disruption of such a wholeness disconnects us from the surrounding, changing our way of feeling ourselves in the world as a specific symptom of depression and schizophrenia. Architects need to critically reconsider their own connection to the life world in order to make the self emerge in their work. This requires humble listening and openness while standing on the edge of everything. This requires a concrete moral stance, which can only emerge from a vivified psyche. Just moments away from final horror and destruction, the resulting bi-urban city would be a gift of grace and healing for our world. Sorry for being a little bit philosophical. That's it.
So thank you very much for this very deep, thoughtful, thorough presentation. And what strikes one is how many concepts have been pronounced in many different ways by speakers here. You spoke about the connection boundary of self and non-self. You spoke about interactions. You spoke about wholeness, belonging, finding centers. And you said the self only comes through in relationship with the other, which brings us full circle back to Lucian Steele's presentation and his quote from Lev Vygotsky, "Through others we become ourselves," which is ultimately what was at the core also of Léon Krier's endeavors and lifelong work. So I think this was a wonderful presentation which has given us the philosophical background on a number of things that were presented so far by our friends architects. And I would now like to pass the floor to Donatella Caramia, who is a professor of neurology at the University of Rome, Tor Vergata. Throughout her career, Professor Caramia has integrated clinical research with the medical humanities, holding teaching appointments across the Faculty of Medicine and Surgery, as well as the Faculty of Letters and Philosophy. She has conducted pioneering foundational research on motor cortex excitability and brain plasticity following stroke, establishing early milestones in modern neurophysiology. Aside from being a neurologist, she is also a classical composer, a Jungian psychoanalyst, and the founder of humanistic neurology, a field that expands standard neurological frameworks by exploring the brain-mind connection, neuroaesthetics, and emotional resonance. She has published interdisciplinary studies, including the volume La musica e oltre, Music and Beyond, co-authored with the maestro Ennio Morricone, which examines musical genius through a neuroscientific and psychoanalytic lens. She has also co-edited the essay Genius Loci, La vita profonda dei luoghi, the deeper life of places, with the architect Paolo Portoghesi, intersecting the value of space in both an architectural and neuroscientific sense. Her talk today is about the neurobiology of beauty, intersecting nature, architecture, and human integrity. Please help me welcome Professor Caramia.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Such a moving presentation, and thank you. And I'm honored to be here in this audience, and I'm very pleased to have you, Alexandra and Luigi, in front of me during this presentation. I wish will be giving you something new. Let's hope. So I would like to project the first slide. And I mean the second, actually, so I can go on. And I should say that neuroaesthetic was introduced almost 20 years ago by Semir Zeki of the University College in sympathy with the discovery that we could investigate the brain with this technique of neuroimaging, allowing us to see how the brain reacts to external stimuli and internal activations. So it came out immediately the possibility of investigating the role of beauty in our brain, in our mind. And Zeki makes a point which is very interesting. He says that great artists like Michelangelo, Leonardo, Picasso, Kandinsky, they were neurologists without ante litteram, neuroscientists ante litteram, without knowing the real, mechanism governing the brain, without knowing brain plasticity, brain areas, and so on. So I can go on because I want to show you something, important. In this first article, Zeki, I will go on in this way. Zeki showed that beauty actually excites a specific part of the brain. And this was obtained by showing the subject under examination different paintings that went from perceived beautiful to ugly and in the middle neutral. As you can see here, I don't know if you can, the pointer. Okay, one moment. Okay, should be, Okay, here. You can see here these red spots indicate the reaction to the exposition of the paintings in these subjects. And each brain represents the sum, the average of all the participants to the study. And you can see here that beautiful versus ugly, beautiful versus neutral, ugly versus beautiful, ugly versus neutral. Look at this one. Ugly versus beautiful doesn't light up anything in the brain. And look here, ugly versus beautiful. Beautiful was accompanied by a clear-cut illumination of a specific area. So, and this is another slide that illustrates the localization of the perceiving beauty, which is, beyond and apart from the stimulation that each subject received, it enlightened itself in congruous areas, in same places, which could be located and then clearly mapped. And so this was a great, great discovery. And it was surprising to see that depending on the intensity of beauty of the image, there was a linear proportion in the intensity of the enlightening of the brain. Okay, this is you see in this one you can see the exact location of the enlightened areas, which is in a very internal portion of the brain. The brain is here cut. And these are three different orientation and cut of the brain slice. So you can see here the sagittal, the horizontal, and the deep location of the analysis performed. Well, perception. Perception, in my view as a neuroscientist, but I share with the other colleagues, of course, is considered as the drive force of awareness. So it's not only something that we receive from the external world through our senses, but it's something that works from within toward the external world. So it becomes very efficient through predictability. So the more we are expecting something that we know and we prize, the more we notice them and value. And it actually helps us to decode actively environmental stimuli and help us to make a map dynamic map of the external space. And of course, as we heard just a few minutes ago, is the crucial link integrating our mind with the biosphere. So the usual question we have heard several times, beauty is outside, beauty is inside. We can stay hours and days talking and be pleasantly involved in this debate, but I can say today to you all that our brain is perfectly capable, prepared to receive a concept of beauty that we all can share with many, many distinctions depending on our tastes, personal education, belonging to ethnic, to several places in the world, but our brain is able to receive this important code, which is beauty. I'm sorry, this is not, oh, no. Okay. So Kandinsky was mentioned by Zeki at the beginning of his manifesto talking about neuroaesthetic, because Kandinsky is considered one of his preferred artists, showing that with his abstract painting, with the invention of abstraction actually, he was like a lay prophet, indicating, based on his own words, that the abstract painting was a sort of cerebral painting, way of painting. So he didn't have any notion that now we have about our interior perception of space, of geometry, of beauty outside, but he interpreted with his heart, that coming from music, brackets, what now we understand as abstraction. I'll take you there, I'll take you there. So the aesthetic experience has to be seen not as an option, is a biological necessity. And beauty shapes human integrity. We are all, we agree about that, we all agree. And the environment built with respect, in respect of beauty, restructure our biology, and it is valid also the contrary, of course. So we have to be very careful to cultivate beauty as much as we can. And the well-being of us depends on the form of space, because we are mainly spatial creatures, because we are navigators. We have to deal with the gravity. Everything we do on the space of the Earth, subject to the force of gravity. So we are great navigators, whatever, in whatever situation, on the Earth, on the sea. So it is important to introduce at this point the emotional system, because what we perceive from outside is not directly sent to our cortex, which is the area, the location where rationality takes place, decision takes place. But it goes through the system of emotions. This is a system which is placed just in the core, sorry, no. In the core, no. No, perché, eccolo, scusate. In the core of our brain, and is composed by different nuclei that receive the information, the emotional information. And I want to underline some nuclei that you all should know or maybe know, which are the amygdala, the nucleus accumbens, the hippocampus, because these regions are involved in the most basic and important emotional reaction that go from fear to pleasure, the two extreme. So it's very important, because when we assume something as beautiful, there is an immediate increase of dopamine in our brain, in our body, in ourself. That means that we can experience pleasure, joy, enthusiasm. And it's important to understand that usually this amygdala can also be triggered, on the other hand, by the opposite. On the contrary, is primarily devoted to grasp danger in the environment, the external environment, so can put us in a situation of safety by the famous reaction of fight and flight. So if we now take this emotional system into consideration with respect to art, we also have to introduce the importance of another structure, which is the hippocampus. The hippocampus is actually our mentor, the center of all our existence, because it transforms all memories which are recently and assumed, transforms short-term memory in long-term memory. And so without the hippocampus, we lose the possibility of maintain memory. And this is very important, and you will see in a few seconds, with respect to the idea, and not only the idea, the experience, the necessity, the reality of navigating in the space. And so, hippocampus, memory, beauty, amygdala, accumbens, ugliness, amygdala, accumbens. The accumbens, maybe I will come back to this, is very important because it is the nucleus that gives us the sense of expectation. So when we are expecting something beautiful, the peak of dopamine falls there, where the accumbens encourage us to stand, open the chest and be ready to receive the beauty or be ready to receive the surprise. On the other hand, it can be, of course, you can know that, it can be linked to dependence and addiction, but this is another story. So, the information that we grasp with our senses can be, and perception can be represented as a journey that goes from bottom to up. It is very quick, and it takes 100 milliseconds. So when something surprises us, we are not prepared to see a beautiful sunset, we can say, oh, a double rainbow, oh, a beautiful piece of art, a beautiful face, a beautiful human being, animal, and so on. It takes very, very short time to be dispatched throughout the brain. Bottom up, so traveling through the spinal cord, the brainstem, the emotional, of course, circuit, and then to the cortex. Then we have an intermediate, a middle level in which the process of perception takes 100 to 200 milliseconds, and it goes through different areas that embrace the communication from the emotional, the limbic system that was called so limbic because marginal, but in reality is very central, to the cortex, to all the cortex, sensory, motor cortex, visual, of course, acoustic, temporal. And then at the end, when the mind and reason comes into play, it takes a long, long time with respect to the 100 milliseconds at the beginning, 500 milliseconds to decode what is going on, what we are perceiving, we are criticizing, comparing, and so on. So, I don't know if I can, who knows, I can reproduce it was, see, there was a video, but doesn't matter. I mean, it was nice, though, very, very colorful. We tried and it worked, but doesn't matter, we can go on. No, it is going on my computer, but you need to maneuver from there. No, oui?
Should I go ahead?
Si. So all the nuclei you have seen, they take part to the reward system, which is, again, so indispensable because pleasure is not an option. Without pleasure, we couldn't live. Without dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter that has a threefold quality, power, we cannot memorize well, we cannot move, and we cannot experience pleasure. So art is the most important provider of pleasure, because even children can be amazed, can just stay in awe in front of something that appears absolutely beautiful in Kantian terms, the sublime. So we can now go to, all the beautiful drawings in different colors were depicting, well, I will show it to you, were depicting the play, the interplay of all these neurotransmitters. I know that this can sound a little bit new for you, but it is so simple. These chemical substances are substances that are very simple in their formula, and they do everything that we can experience as a beautiful life, a challenging life, an awful life. I mean, it depends on the balance of this. Dopamine is very important, but also GABA, which is calming and neuroprotecting our brain, and so the peptidergic, which give us analgesic, and so on. And you see they depart for being created in the center, in the heart of the brain, then to cross and to reach the cortex and our rationality. And then we can choose what to do with our life with respect to beauty or to ugliness. So beauty moves us, but not only from outside, but from inside especially. And now I briefly introduce the concept of mirror neurons. Who are they? I mean, what do they do? It's very simple. It's a very simple system. The monkeys, they have it very, very represented in the brain. They have been actually discovered first in the human being, but it was not the paper of the Parma group, but Brizzolati, but of our group in Rome that, displayed the ability to mirroring an image coming from outside by decreasing the excitability or increasing the excitability of the brain. So told, we can say that these neurons are very important for understanding how we imitate, emulate, learn what is represented in front of us. They are very important because can explain how imitation can be worthy or how imitation can be shallow and superficial. But just to say, I want to say this, I don't know if it's something that you know very, very well. If I say something like that in front of Alexandra, she's not moving now, it's completely immobile, but her brain in a precise area, I can map it, say 6 centimeters lateral to the vertex and 1 centimeter in front of it on this interauricular line is firing because you are mimicking what I'm doing. Is it profound? Is it shallow? We don't know. It depends on how your emotional system is now processing what I am doing. Okay. So, we can go on this subject, but no, we can say even, why I show here the Prigioni of Michelangelo? Because our mind tends to complete what is not fully displayed in the sculpture, you see? Because this is the work of reflecting, of mirroring, and eventually completing what is not fully expressed. Okay, now comes my lover. I love Blaise Pascal, that you all know, because it introduces something genial. The concept of geometry, as opposed to the esprit de finesse, l'esprit de géométrie, as the other counterpart of our way of conceiving, perceiving, living our life. So it is important for architecture and for all of us because we are natural architects, even if we are not architects in a professional way. But we navigate, we predict, we construct, we avoid dangers in our journey while we walk and everything. And we draw the stars that then we decorate our Christmas trees. You know, it's absolutely, the children, they love geometry. They are instinctively drawn to geometry. It's an instinct. So, but is a very refined one, is an esprit. So, is a cognitive code, like math, like language, like music. So, geometry allows us to convert the math harmony from abstraction to the possibility of seeing it in full blossom. Let's say it translates the experience of geometry like a feeling, like a spirit inside, in something that we then live, and the architects knows it very, very well. It starts from the draw, and then everything comes afterward. Repetition is important for this spirit because it's a part of the harmonic composition of what geometry expresses outside and inside us. Symmetry is important, order is important. And all these qualities, I should call in this version, in this moment, qualities, are very, very benefic for the brain because brain perceives order as a measure of survival. So, if you are interested, I will say to you that the corteccia, the entorhinal cortex is very important because contains the grid cells of which I will talk in the following, in depth in the following slide. Then there is a parietal lobe, which is the one devoted to the perception, sensory perception, somatosensory perception, all the senses in the cortex, and the famous hippocampus, so that it is not only the alchemic place where memory is transformed in long-term memory, so sustains our life in any respect, but also because contains the mental GPS, the structure that allows us to navigate the space and memorize it. In fact, we can navigate the space when we know it, even with closed eyes. So, but before going there, I want to emphasize the role of this study that demonstrate that circular shapes were perceived as very comfortable by our awareness, our consciousness, in contrast with angular shapes that they can make our amygdala, the nucleus, the emotional nucleus for fear, alert. So it is important to take this in mind. There is a demonstration which I immediately show you. So these are obtained by neuroimaging technique. These are averaged images of brain. And you can see here that in green and yellow are grouped in precise, very precise brain areas, what is perceived as circular and angular shapes together. Then we have the angular shapes, you see, in green. They are separated now from the circular ones. And then we have the round shapes in yellow. So you can remember now that they took place in different locations while near, but they have a specific message to send. I am round, I am angular, I am friendly, I am a little bit. Okay, and so why Borromini is so charming, is so beautiful, it appeals us. I mean, what can we say? Round and round and round the corner. There is no fear. We see this and we say, oh, this dome is paradise. Because, I mean, the angles and the corners are very much softened. And this is, I mean, what Borromini expressed in his architecture geniality. So, it is important to think about the technical application, the practical application of this concept, because in the field of neuroarchitecture, this consideration of taking care of roundness, of circularity instead of angularity is very important because they can soften stress and transmit a greater emotional comfort. Briefly, I'll show you this. I mean, the hippocampus is like a seahorse, is in the center of the limbic system. Of course, it's the heart of emotions, but it's also the heart of memory and the heart of our mechanism. Is not a nice word but it is indeed a neural aggregate that make us the beautiful navigator that we are. And if you see here the grid, the grid here, these are the grid cells, and you can see that they are possibly encircled in an hexagon. You see here there is the hippocampus, and these are the place cells that they fire when somebody is locating a specific place, and so they represent the longitudinal and latitudinal coordinates, whilst this is the way in which we can navigate the space given to the exceptional, regular firing, precise, like in an airplane, firing of these neurons. With this discovery, three scientists were awarded with the Nobel Prize in 2015. And particularly, I can say that I had the pleasure and the privilege to talk about it and with Paolo Portoghesi, who was really in the idea of mixing up neuroscience and architecture just because of the fact that we are natural architects, and we have this natural love and passion. Now, this is another example of how the grid cells can produce in the creativity and geniality of an architect something that is extroverted, like Kandinsky with his marvelous abstract paintings. This, the geodesic dome. But you see, this is absolutely the idea, and he did it without knowing the system, of course. So was just representing what happens in our hippocampus and then projected to the rationality. And you see that the aggressive potential of the angles is softened by the curvature of the dome. Okay? I'm almost there. La poetica di Portoghesi. I would like to say just something in Italian, if you allow me. This was a private conversation that then was published afterward. Portoghesi diceva: per me il rapporto con il luogo consiste nell'ascoltarlo e mettersi in sintonia con esso quasi fosse una persona, un genius loci. Quindi i luoghi sono frammenti dello spazio infinito, il luogo un po' alla Bachelard è il luogo dei luoghi, è il corpo del mondo. Quindi è oggetto di percezione attraverso i 5 sensi, ma al di là del visibile, del sensibile, ogni luogo possiede un'identità che la percezione umana non riesce a definire completamente. In esso resta qualcosa che in qualche modo lo trascende. Lo stesso accade per gli esseri umani. La percezione del corpo non esaurisce ciò che vorremmo conoscere della loro identità. Mi fermerei qui perché è così profondo, ve lo potete leggere. Quando disse queste parole io rimasi veramente colpita dalla grandezza di un uomo che fosse stato uno, 2 o 3, ne ho conosciuti così, ho avuto la fortuna che non finisce mai di stupirmi quando lo rileggo e mi interrogo su questi passaggi meravigliosi. Non potevo non farvi vedere questa casa Baldi da lui disegnata e dipinta in questo sketch meraviglioso che parla proprio della sua, I'm going back to English now, is poetic, the poetic of the curve, which has been the last book he published before leaving our world. And so is the architecture of life. So the straight line is an intellectual abstraction for Portuguese, while the curve belongs intrinsically to nature and to the bodies of living beings. Then movement, the curve gives the idea of movement. Of course, we can detect the beautiful connection with the Barocco, and he had this great passion and left us the most beautiful treatise on this subject, on Borromini. And then he always thought about music, and in this also we were very much in agreement. And so the idea that the architect compares the continuity of the curve to the expressive faculty of music, of entertaining our mind, our soul. Both do not represent real objects, but they elicit state of the soul, emotional states, feelings, and interiority. So curve moves us in a way, in a word. Okay, and this is the beautiful Moschea di Roma, in which the sinuous lines appear as sacred geometry of life in his words. I'm going to conclude my presentation. I'm happy, I'm honored to mention Léon Krier, that I had also the pleasure of meeting and conversing with, and is the champion of traditional architecture and urbanism. He summarizes everything, every word I've spoken until now in this audience. And of course, it can be only the basis for this meaningful harmony that we are seeking, instinctively seeking, for meeting our true biological expectations. So, architecture, emotions, and humanitas, what can we pray for more than these 3 words? For hoping, cultivating the image of our future that goes toward a beauty that modifies plastically our brain, our cerebral synapses. And so the design intended as such is to be considered the true panacea, the true cure for our life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Caramia. Thank you, Donatella, for this wonderful presentation, which has provided us, I think, with a lot of scientific answers. Well, certainly it has given me an answer as to why, whenever I go to the Accademia in Florence, I look at the Prigioni of Michelangelo and I think, I wonder how it functions when I finish it. Now I know it's the mirror neurons, yes. So, and the other thing is that as you were speaking, and you brought up, sort of the pointed stars and triangles and then their curves before you even showed the Borromini. I thought, this is the answer why Borromini is so exciting, because on the one hand, you have the triangles that activate the amygdala, and then on the other hand, you have this sort of circular, encompassing, beautiful harmony about his spaces. So definitely, I'm a Portoghese fan as well, and what you said resonated. And also the idea of, the idea that the brain perceives order as a measure of survival. And I want to quote here one of my great teachers, who was Ernst Gombrich, who wrote a magnificent essay on the sense of order in rapport to art. And so thank you, because you put a lot of little missing bits to, at least to my experience as an art historian, and I'm sure to everybody else's as architects. So I think we can now go down for a coffee, for a break, and we'll start again. Question? Absolutely. Do we want questions now? Yes, we can also do questions. Yes. We need to give you the microphone.
In regards to being a philosopher psychologist, you deal with the irreal real, I would think, the irreal world and the real world, right? So based on that, we're in a transitional society right now where the self is split in two. We have the self that's based on the first outside world, which is the world we live in, and then we have what could be framed as the pseudo-self, which is the technological self, which comes from what's going on computers and AI and these things. So based on that concept, how do you see the effect on collective consciousness and the worldview because of that?
That's a very good question. Actually, Professor Gallese, that I quoted a couple of times, just published a book about that. It's in Italian, The Extended Self. It means that the technological interface has been always part of our being humans. The first interface being the use of fire. Even the use of architecture, if you think, is an interface, a technological interface. So technology is something that is intrinsically connected to our being humans. I have a friend who is actually the son of Sergio Loss, who was a great architect. He's an architect as well, and this guy is studying how, in his opinion, architecture itself, it's before rationality. So the rationality has been built after architecture, in a way. We started by cutting the stone, and there you got the first cut that allow us to become humans in the sense we mean. Now, the problem of electronic interactions, artificial intelligence, and so on is very urgent, of course. And the problem is that it's so fast. So we have no time to cope with it. It's faster than us for the first time in history. I didn't read the encyclica by the Pope that just been released about this subject. I think there are some good intuition. I read some paper about that around. But the point is, it's not about fearing this technology, but trying to find a way of keeping our core, ourself, even using this technology. And that's the most difficult part, because it can become, of course, a kind of a maze. All the time I think of the human brain. We have a lot of explanation here about the brain. I think of the maze. And the maze is one of the most important symbols we have in our culture, if you think, from 5,000 years ago to now. The first architect produced the maze to put a monster into it. And the monster was asking for blood until the same architect has been put in there. I think my job is to put the architect inside the maze. I don't know if I answer in a way.
I didn't talk about the default mode network, which is a system that is always operating within us and parallel our consciousness during wake, when we are awake. We are not always awake. We are awake in two worlds. We are awake from perceiving the environment, the people, the feelings, the atmosphere, the Stimmung. But we are awake to what we are imagining, abstracting, repeating, ruminating, projecting in the future, and remembering from the past, inventing. And so you all don't have an idea on how many times we go into that default mode network. Even now, you have been there a few times, maybe more than a few. So it is important. This is just a piece for giving you an exercise of matching the two worlds that has to be harmonized, and beauty is the medicine.
Since we've opened the floor to questions, anyone else wants to ask something to one of our two first speakers? Well, if not, we can, in any case, yes?
Alessandra, I just had one comment that I thought was quite amusing, because obviously we've had the philosophy, the psychology, the neuroscience, and we'll get more later. But I was at University of Cambridge, since I'm related to the Department of Architecture, but actually not in it, which is better. What happens is that I get these emails, and I saw a seminar on neuroscience, and I thought, I better go online to that. And there was a discussion about several of these kinds of issues, and actually both kinds of material that we've just heard. And there was also some other material that hasn't come up, but I think a lot of people will be familiar with. For example, these kinds of studies that you go, say, down a street, and if you monitor people's brain activities and so on, and it's a blank wall of glass, not much is happening. But if you see, ornaments and interest, different materials and so on, the stuff happens. So, but there was this Martin Center, which is this kind of scientific research center within the Department of Architecture in the University of Cambridge. And when it came to these things coming up, they said, there was discussion, well, this would lead us to support traditional architecture. And the head of the director said, but that would be dangerous. I just leave that with you.
Thank you. What you said about is findings how to conceive beauty. The question is on a neurological base, how beauty is conceived as such means what is conceived in the human brain as beautiful, also which kind of morphology is conceived as beautiful. This would be interesting. It's the very base of all this, of all the arguments following.
That this is a question that is an affirmation. We can Okay. Okay, sorry. So I think that the perception of beauty beyond its objectively statement, appearance, is perceived as such. And you can perceive something beautiful, a painting, an fresco, something, and it will let that part of the brain fire, you see? So the content of beauty is not localized in the brain, it's not mapped. I mean, beauty itself, and I show you that beauty passes through the emotional system. So once we are elicited with a pleasure, so the pleasure of our senses, then in the cortex goes to that place, which is the place of beauty. No, I don't know if I answered you properly. Until now, maybe in the future we will also depict other places, sub-places. But until now, but this opens a nice philosophical speculation. So again, is objective, is subjective. I mean, again. But also, I say now something very strong, and maybe many neurologists would say, oh, Donatella, what you are saying, that the brain is a constrictor. It constricts, filters, reduces. So imagine the greatness of beauty and the restriction of our brain. So since it is plastic, I like your question, it makes me think, since the brain is very plastic and continuously regenerates itself, not in terms of cellular population, which is eternal more or less, but in terms of synaptic connections, communication, well, if we rehearse and train ourselves of seeing beauty and affect beauty in art, in music, I mean, see, when I say see, I also intend hear, smell, taste. You see, it's an image that plurisensorial, beauty is plurisensorial. So as long as we train to make us more attuned, then maybe more places in the brain will enlarge the location, the topology will change from one individual to another one, like the brain of a pianist with respect to another person who doesn't play the instrument. I don't know if I answered to you.
Oh, just about what Professor Wilson just said, it's very interesting because the stuff that what is dangerous about classic architecture, the anthropology. So the problem, I have a brilliant student who is now a professor of neurodesign, Menno Kramer, and he asked me, okay, I understand what you say about the different architecture, how this design may affect our neurophysiology, etc., but if I am a manager making a lot of money in London, I need a kind of architecture to exalt this kind of rhythm, you know, this kind of schizophrenia in a way. So I answer, yes, you're right. It's like cocaine. You can have, cocaine in architecture terms, in a way, to push you in this kind of schizophrenic society and become a winner in that sense. So what is at stake is not just classicism, it's what's behind that. It's a form of being human. It's an ethics. It's a form of life.
I want to say something, I don't know, it's a provocative of whatever you like, but going back to what was the question Ulrich was asking about, I think this is a very modern, or let's say contemporary questions, because we have to probably go back in time, and probably a little bit more than a century ago, nobody would have posed the question, what does it mean, beauty? Because at certain point it was decided that it was some elite that had the verb, And now we believe that something is beautiful only because there is some expert, which probably would be better to be defined, smoke vendors, that is convincing people about the beauty of something that everybody perceives as ugliness. And so there is a confusion, and sometimes there is also fear to say, I don't like that, and I like that, because apparently it's necessary to be a super expert to understand something that other people don't understand. Donatella was talking about the way kids are reacting. So that is the demonstration that you don't need to have any particular concept behind to understand how beautiful is something. I like to make an exercise with my students when I bring them to Napoli, and I bring them to the Cappella San Severo, and when they are in front of the Disinganno, in front of the Cristo Velato and the Pudicizia, they are absolutely, astonished about what is there. Or when I bring them to the Toro Farnese, and only after their reaction, I ask them if they have any idea of what is the representation there. And then I explain them how the concept behind the subject, behind the beauty they can perceive, is an additional level of beauty eventually. But the beautiful object is something that independently from our background, it's possible to be perceived by anybody. Yesterday, someone was saying, I'm not an expert of architecture, I don't know if I can talk. Please do it. Probably people that are not being brainwashed in the School of Architecture are more genuine to explain to the architect what architecture must be, because the domination of ideology in the last century and a half caused too many problems, and now are bringing us to be afraid to say, I don't like that and I like that.
Thank you very much, Ettore. Anyone else wants to add something? Yes? Oh my goodness. Let's have Matthew.
I'll be quick because I know everyone is longing for a coffee. Just to report some very recent research of a student of mine from Oxford who went on to Cambridge to finished her PhD in 3 years flat, who has been using very latest brain imaging techniques to look at the reaction in the brain of people who look at various styles of building. And I can sum it up in a sentence. Looking at angular modernist buildings causes brain inflammation, even in people who say that they like them.
Thank you, that's a good point.
Perfect. Yeah, the brain, I have to say, the brain knows the truth. Just see.
Each one of us has to walk with a hand to show you
Hi, yes, thank you so much for your talk. Something I've been thinking a lot about lately is intuition versus the rational. And you could say maybe the Salem witch trials were an example of too far in the extreme to the intuitive, and modernism has been the pendulum swinging back to too far into the rational and the scientific. So we use data to define our world and to set our goals, and those goals then become perverted somehow when we hyper-optimize towards one end. So I see your presentation, learning about the amygdala and how it relates to beauty, so fascinating. But, for example, I don't need to understand the neuroscience to know why I find a beautiful girl beautiful. Nobody needs to be an expert when they're dating, right? But for some reason, architecture needs to be justified. So I suppose my question is, how do we find the balance in the pendulum between the intuitive and the scientific? And are we swimming in this scientific world where we need to justify things scientifically and rationally, even though our intuition also confirms?
Of course, Leonardo knew, Newton knew. They knew, Kandinsky knew intuitively with their genius. The point that we are seekers, we are explorers, we need to know. And so the exploration is a route to awareness, through what I call in Italian la via della consapevolizzazione. To be mindful is something that helps ourselves to get rid of many, many, many depressive aspects of our interiority, because this is, I mean, it's scaring, especially going along the life. We have a long life, thankfully, and so it is important to cultivate this route. And of course, the pendulum has to be brought in the middle, because we need intuition and its counterpart, which is rationality. Of course. But for instance, I will now answer to you with my instinct. I love the brain, and I love to discover how it works, and especially in neuroscience, dealing with feeling, beauty, and things that deals with the image of the soul. So, and the psyche. So we are so invaded with our fantasies, always. Each of you are fantasizing something in this moment. Words stimulate fantasies. Music, especially. I didn't mention this file, otherwise I would not stop talking. I will not stop. Okay, so the pendulum has to be in the middle, but it's a pleasure itself to discover how we perceive things. This is my opinion. And of course, it is of help. It's a joy, even for Paolo Portoghesi.
Good evening. May I introduce myself? My name is Andrei Brachin. I'm an architect and a historian of architecture. So, thank you for your presentation. I want you to notice that we have different types of beauty. So when we are speaking about beauty, or we are talking about order architecture, we understand that there are spectrum of variety of variants of architecture, from ancient to Middle Ages, from, I don't know, Quattrocento to Palladio, and then from Bramini to Piacentini. And it's beautiful. It's very interesting that there are so many different types. But I think that everybody here and everybody will want to live at that small, nice houses that Professor Jonathan showed us in his presentation. And all of us know the beauty of Italian architecture. So that's this.
So this is the poetic of the space.
Talking about beauty, like adding a layer that maybe we have not talked about. From the perspective, classical and Christian, beauty, God is beauty itself, and order is his signature. So all that we see as beauty is a reflection of him. And we are a reflection of him. We are made as his image. So that is why we have a big necessity of beauty in ourselves. So, thank you.
So obviously, if there is some other question, it will be more than welcome. But I'm very happy of this afternoon, and is not ended up yet. Because even this question about what does it mean beauty, there are many different kinds of beauties, etc., etc. To me, it's very important. Also, the question or the assessment. I don't need to know neuroscience. Of course, you don't. But we can't forget that Vitruvius, in the first book, is saying that the architect needs to know many disciplines. He doesn't have to excel in all of these, but it's important to know it. And in this case, obviously, neuroscience on Vitruvius' time was not existing yet. But no more than nowadays for architects is necessary to know that there are science that are studying the side effects of the architects. And some, there are so many perversions. And so there are people that are appreciating things that are insane. So the question of what does it mean beautiful has a very large spectrum. This is the reason why it's so important to me to put on the stage people that are talking about science. I'm not a hyper-scientist. I consider that the transformation of the analysis of the whole world in mathematical way after the Enlightenment is one of the most important reasons of the drama of nowadays. But I'm extremely interested in knowing science that are studying many different things, and that are fundamentally important to open the eyes of architects, because we can have our taste. Obviously, beauty, for me, maybe is different from the one Stefano has. I don't think so, but probably. But this is also going to the misunderstanding of the concept of freedom of the 20th century and 21st century, because my freedoms ends up where is invading the freedom of the others. So we need to return to a world that is taking in consideration the common goods and something that is a common sense of beauty. And if we are not able to do it as an architect, we need to have someone that is going to wake up architect and say, stop, as unfortunately it was made an attempt during the journey of 1933 of the Siam, and it was said, please stop and watch behind you because people are not following you, people are lost. Architects believe to be artists, believe that their ideas are, let's say, their dreams are correct, but many times their dreams are becoming the nightmares for those that have to live there. And so the presence of people that are talking about our profession from a different, and in this case, a scientific point of view, to me is fundamentally important.
Yeah, I made the inexcusable mistake of not mentioning the author of the scientific report that I was describing, which is Dr. Cleo Valentine. But I wanted to simply echo what Ettore has said in an essay we published very early on the INTBAU website by Nikos Salingaros. He writes that architects, meaning modern architects, are not interested in science. The essay is called Modern Architecture as a Cult, or As a Cult, and I strongly recommend it because he argues very cogently that architects are not using science and they're not using scientific methods to improve their work. So it's interesting that the traditional architects that we are describing are actually following this science so closely. Thank you.
Unfortunately, I will have to ask you to continue the discussion downstairs over coffee. Let's shorten our coffee break a little bit because we have one more speaker this evening. If there is time, we will have also another set of questions after Olga Sezneva's talk, after coffee. But at 7, we should be ready because we have external public coming in for the concert. And there has been a change in the program. This evening, the concert will be our former student and rather famous by now harpist, Joost Willemze, with a harp concert. This should be happening at 7. We might postpone it to 7:15, but we can't be too late. So let's go for coffee, 15 minutes, then let's come back for Professor Sezneva's talk, and then we'll do a short round of questions. Thank you. Okay, may I please ask everyone to take a seat to conclude our session and our day with our last speaker, who is Professor Olga Sezneva, a cultural and urban sociology who connects sociology with architecture, design, and artistic practice. She earned a PhD in sociology from New York University and held postdoctoral fellowships at the University of Chicago in various visiting positions before joining the University of Amsterdam in 2010. Her research explores how material culture, including urban design, intersects with histories and narratives of conflict and forced migration, looking at the politics of memory and practices such as vernacular collecting and architectural revival, considering how aesthetic categories such as beauty or ugliness are attributed to urban space. Together with architects, she has helped launch Building the City Now, a transdisciplinary program in urban and social design accredited by the Universitat Politècnica de Catalunya, which brings together architects, sociologists, activists, and city administrators to rethink how they shape the city. Her goal is to reveal how memory, place, and cultural meaning are rebuilt after rupture, and to show how art, architecture, and education can together open new ways of engaging with the past, present, and the future of cities. Her talk today is Making Beauty Together, a sociological reframing of urban aesthetics and design responsibility. Please help me welcome Olga Sezneva.
Well, thank you very much, Alexandra, for this great invitation and introduction. And thank you all for being here at this late hour. I know it's not easy. So I'll try to do my best to convince you that sociology, urban sociology, cultural sociology has a lot to offer to design and architectural professionals. And I want to begin with the point of agreeing with the premise of this panel. Beauty has returned as a serious category in architecture and urbanism because many people experience contemporary built environment as exhausting, alienating, monotonous, or emotionally indifferent. The renewed debate around beauty registers a real dissatisfaction with urban spaces that fail to sustain attachment, orientation, dignity, pleasure, and communal life. At the same time, beauty remains a difficult and politically burdened category. For decades now, architectural and social critique demonstrated that supposedly universal standards of beauty often conceal exclusion. Distinctions between cultivated and vulgar, civilized and backward, legitimate and undesirable, all mark classed and racialized positions. Beauty became suspect not simply because it appeared elitist, but because it often naturalized historically specific forms of authority, taste, and belonging. This is why the return of beauty today is significant. But the question is no longer simply whether beauty matters. Rather, how we are to understand beauty under conditions of social plurality, historical conflict, and unequal urban life. How do people recognize themselves in places that are beautiful or ugly? How do they become attached to them? How do buildings and urban spaces support common life? There are points in which I converge with the person in memory of whom this conference is called, Léon Krier. Like Krier, I reject the reduction of architecture to technical problem solving or market calculation, and I also take seriously the proposition that buildings in urban form shape civic experience, collective memory, collective attachment, and the possibility of common life in general. But there is also where our paths diverge. For Krier, beauty ultimately inheres in historically evolved urban forms themselves: proportion, typological continuity, craft, bounded streets, recognizable public spaces, civic legibility. Beauty appears as if the visible expression of proper civic order accumulated over time and stored in space. I, in contrast, understand beauty not as an autonomous property of form, but as one possible outcome of situated aesthetic judgment, the practice of valuation. And I'm going to put this on the slide here for you to see that with this proposition, the focus on beauty as a judgment, the questions are now, what is this judgment, right? What is its nature, so to speak? How is it distributed in society, or who is the judge? And how does judgment become consequential? In other words, how do we act upon what we judge as beautiful or not? There is also something to consider about cities. They are not naturally harmonious objects. From Georg Simmel to Louis Wirth to the Chicago School to LA School, we learned that cities tend not towards harmony, and that urban life is constituted through proximity without sameness, coordination without full agreement, coexistence under unequal conditions. So I'm thinking about Wirth's famous dictum, density, diversity, heterogeneity, right? So this means that if beauty matters in cities, it does so not because it resolves urban tensions into harmony. Beauty matters because aesthetic judgment itself is one of the means through which urban tensions and conflict are perceived, articulated, negotiated, and made inhabitable. That is, we continue living in messy, heterogeneous cities. So in thinking about beauty and harmony, we therefore have to move from harmony to urban plurality and heterogeneity, from the idea of the city as a coherent aesthetic object to the city as a field of conflicting attachments, uses, memories, and claims. To develop this argument today, I will draw on sources that may seem far apart. It will be urban sociology, but also the sociology of human beauty, valuation studies, material semiotics, and my examples will not come from famous cities. They will not be canonical, well-known architecture. They will be rather probably unknown to you places. Anybody can name any of these locations? Huh? Close. Nice guesses, no, but it's a worm, right? It's a worm. So why? Well, if we deal with already established examples, we already know their value. That is to say that the expert opinion already shaped and sealed them in their status of legitimacy. But these cities, and I will reveal the secret later, I promise. These cities have a very mixed, very conflictual spaces urban spaces they are, in essence, also because they have very conflictual histories. And beauty, what counts as beautiful, what counts as legitimate, is constantly changing, roughly every 20 to 25 years there. As I already said, I will also bring examples from studies of human beauty to talk about urban aesthetics, and I will talk about tomatoes. I know, coming from the Netherlands, I may be suspect there, right? But the country is the greatest exporter of a tomato, so maybe there is a point. So, understanding cities as heterogeneous, where heterogeneous contexts in which judgment and valuation is constantly made, leaves us with the important central question, which I also think aligns with the concern of this conference: how architecture and urban form participate in making collective life. So I would like to begin this exploration with a short, brief trip back to sociology. Well, back to philosophy, actually, and then to sociology. So bear with me. I hope to make it informative. And it's actually necessary to understand where I'm bringing you to. As I said, the question for me is not whether beauty matters, but how aesthetic judgment becomes possible in the first place. Immanuel Kant gives one of the foundational formulations of what beauty is. In the Critique of Judgment, he grounds beauty is disinterested pleasure. What Kant means is not that aesthetic pleasure is dispassionate, distanced, or lacks engagement, but that it is detached from utility, possession, or practical interest, right? So it is emotional, but it's not practical. A judgment of beauty for Kant is not confined to private interest, not private sensation. It enters the world as a claim on others. And this is especially important for our conversation because buildings and urban spaces belong to a shared world. They are social by nature. To judge them beautiful or ugly is not merely to report a personal sensation. It is to make a claim about how a common environment should be perceived and valued. But this is also where Kant reaches his limit. He does not speak, he doesn't ask whose judgment can plausibly speak in this universalizing voice, and whose judgment is excluded. So 2 centuries later, a French sociologist, Pierre Bourdieu, proposed what he understood as a scientific alternative to Kantian aesthetics. According to Bourdieu, who studied consumption practices in France of everybody from peasants, working class, to the industrial elites and financiers. According to him, his empirical studies of taste, disinterested contemplation is neither purely universal nor genuinely detached from material conditions of existence. It is rather what he famously described, I quote, the paradoxical product of conditioning by negative economic necessities. The very disposition Immanuel Kant treats as universal closely resembles the aesthetic orientation empirically associated with educated bourgeois elite, with the Bürger class. So to call something beautiful, according to Bourdieu, to call something beautiful may look like a spontaneous response to form, but in actuality, it is a translation of privilege into perception. This insight sparked thousands of studies showing how aesthetic judgment in a range of fields contribute to the reproduction of inequalities, and you probably heard about this under the concept of cultural capital, right? So this is something that is in wide use today. Good. But Bourdieu leaves another question open. How is beauty evaluated as such in the first place? Through which categories, comparisons, and how is something recognized as beautiful? So my own research begins from urban environments, as I said, in which beauty is unstable, contested, and politically charged. And in such context, aesthetic judgment becomes unusually visible because buildings are not simply admired or disliked, but because they are treated as evidence of care, domination, neglect, corruption, dignity, or non-belonging. And this is where evaluation theory of my colleague Giselinda Cowpers, her work on human beauty, becomes useful for us also to think about urban beauty. So I turn to it not because bodies and buildings are the same kind of objects, but because her ideas allow us to look more closely at the aesthetic judgment itself. So Cowpers positions her work against, she studies beauty, human beauty. She positions her work against two dominant approaches. First, evolutionary or biological. It explains beauty through sexual selection, fitness signaling, and the assumption that attraction has a biological substrate. The second, the so-called beauty premium, or aesthetic capital approach, shifts attention to inequality. Attractiveness translates into better wages, employment opportunity, vast social networks, and general well-being. Yet both approaches often share one assumption. There is a broad agreement about who is attractive. So this is something that we heard today already in the earlier presentation, right? We all kind of know what the beauty is when we see it. Cowper's intervention is to question this assumption and to study beauty instead as an open question. Not who is beautiful, but what are socially available categories and standards through which people recognize and describe beauty. This brings her to what she terms repertoire of evaluation, patterned vocabularies and sensibilities through which male and female body is assessed differently across social groups and contexts. One of the clearest examples of a repertoire of evaluation is naturalness versus artificiality. So in the interviews that Cowpers conducted, heavily visible makeup, conspicuous cosmetic surgery, or overt bodily enhancement were often judged negatively by highly educated cosmopolitan respondents. And not because these respondents rejected beauty work itself. They actually have done it on themselves just as well. But because legitimate beauty increasingly required aesthetic labor to appear effortless, restrained, look natural. Naturalness is associated with self-control and sophistication, while excessive visibility with vulgarity and lower social status. So beauty here is a way to judge not only aesthetics, but also character, gender performance, social legitimacy. And I think the importance of this argument, it's subtle, right? It's not an argument of the subjectivity of taste. It's the argument that actually how we relate to people aesthetically immediately puts them in the hierarchy, in the social hierarchy. It has direct consequences to how we relate and how we treat people. It creates social categories. So in these judgments, aesthetic value is bound up with moral value. And I will return to this point later. So Cowpers helps us to see beauty as judged through socially available repertoires. But for architecture and urban space, I need one further step. Buildings and streets are not only looked at, they are worked with, they are inhabited, maintained, financed, defended, neglected, and transformed. So I need to shift to matter and mattering, the material engagement with the city, the practical work. So, and this is how I come to Annemarie Mol and her good tomato that comes from the Netherlands. So Mol and her student Frank Hutz asked a deliberately simple question: what is a good tomato? The answer quickly destabilized the idea that there is one and clearly defined good one. A tomato, they showed, may be good because it tastes rich and sweet. It may be good because it looks red, round, and attractive on a supermarket shelf. A tomato may be valued because it is profitable, ecological, local, durable, or historically authentic. Good tomato is not singular, it's multiple. Second, these are not simply different opinions about the same object. They are different practical worlds in which this object is involved. These are farmers, growers, traders, chefs, and consumers. And they all do a work, practical work of growing, pruning, selecting, transporting, displaying, cooking, tasting. The qualities of tomato are consequential through practical activities around it, but equally, practical activities can improve the tomato. A tomato can be warmed up and slightly cooked if it's, say, overripe. It can be perfected through a practice of care. And again, I ask you to keep this idea of care and care as related to goodness in mind. So the point here is that goodness and beauty are situated achievements. They emerge through practical efforts to align, negotiate, and sustain partially incompatible criteria of worth. This is a quick summary of what I just walked you through and showed with examples of human beauty and the tomato. And now I would like to go directly to my own research, which I did with my PhD student, Anastasia Halovnova, in 3 cities that you now see. So the guess of Szczecin was a pretty good one, but it's actually Wrocław, the city of Klaipėda, former German Memel, and the city of Kaliningrad, former German Königsberg. And these cities are particularly interesting in terms of their aesthetics because they changed hands, right? These all are former German cities that were transferred to the Soviet Union or Poland in 1945 and which were rebuilt according to the post-war modernist socialist standards. So their architectural spaces are very uneven and very mixed. Not only that, the populations were also supplanted, right? So the Germans were deported and Polish speakers or Russian speakers were brought in to resettle. That means that the architecture, the rebuilding of those cities was very central to the project of social engineering of these places as Polish or Russian or Lithuanian to the nation-building project. But the architecture was also central to making people feel at home, to take root and to stay. That was the political state project. On this slide, I just wanted to show you, to give you an example of how different, how mixed the spaces of these cities can be. So, how to understand the valuation of urban space in these complex, conflicted cities? Q-sort methodology is a way to go, we decided. It's a method in which people are given examples, in this case 25 examples of places. I chose the city of Kaliningrad for illustration today, and they were asked to rank them from the least attractive, -4, to the most attractive, +4. After buildings, places, spaces were ranked, we asked our respondents to provide justifications, to provide an explanation of what was the criteria by which they classify the said places as such. And in Kaliningrad, former Königsberg, the first pattern seemed very predictable. German period architecture was evaluated consistently positively, while Soviet housing estates and most of the post-Soviet socialist development was judged negatively. So everything that happened in the city before 1945 was beautiful, everything that came after was ugly. Very interesting, because everything that was ugly was built by the very people who now populate the city. There is a clear misalignment with identity. So German brick buildings were not valued simply because they were beautiful or historic. They appeared as signs of specifically continuity and specifically historical truths. And that's important because we are looking at the state that consistently and systematically creates a propaganda about its own history. Negative judgments, however, were not simply opposite of beautiful. They were differentiated in rather complex way. So, Soviet housing blocks were not rejected under one general category of ugliness. In one register, repertoire of evaluation, they were ugly because they appeared to erase their residents' individuality. They were universal equalizers, and they implied that there was no difference among the occupants. So here, the relevant metric of valuation was dignity, differentiation, and the moral problem with standardization associated with socialist modernity. In another register, however, the same buildings were criticized for leaking concrete seam, deteriorating balcony, poor materials, and inadequate maintenance. There, ugliness became a diagnosis of technological failure and institutional neglect, right? So very different from an individual response that we saw in the first metric. In the picture down below, this white building is actually a recent 2010 development. And this building is called Ugly, although I saw uglier in my life, not because of its, not just because of its scale, color, or style, but because it was situated just the opposite of the old Königsberg Cathedral. And as such, it was read as a sign of a private gain overriding public responsibility to sustain and preserve history. So here we see a register of valuation based on a civic relation. So aesthetic judgment activated locally specific registers: truth and authenticity, individuality, modernity, dignity, civic disrespect. These registers are not universal and they are not interchangeable, and it is actually a task of a builder or a developer to understand how do people in the area of construction understand and value. What are the repertoires of valuation that are present there? For the sake of time, I'm going to shorten significantly the story of the Königsberg Cathedral, just to mention that this was a building that was practically leveled. This is the island, and these are the remains of the cathedral in the war bombings. And it stayed as a ruin until 1993, when the foundation, public foundation, was created for rebuilding of the cathedral. Now, this place, this building, even though it's not actually, I hesitate to say it, it's not beautiful. But it is named beautiful. It's consistently on +4 value in all the groups that we discussed, we talked to, because people said it was built with the hands of city residents, again, from scratch. People organized workshops, people took their weekends to come together to the former Kneiphof Island and brick by brick rebuild this building. So the cathedral became beautiful because it was made to matter. It involved the community in the practical action of coming together and creating and constituting their space. Now, I will take 2 more minutes to say a few words of what we can do with this idea of multiple registers of valuation and the importance of practical engagement in constituting, making cities beautiful, what we can do in our pedagogies. How can we become those kind of city builders and developers? In 2014, I joined a team of architects and sociologists, ecologists, and activists in St. Petersburg and created a program that brought these different specialists of the city together. We designed 6 workshops, practical workshops, which we ran in the form of an escape room. Why the escape room? Well, because rather than being politely complementary to one another, we actually didn't want to preserve the place of expertise, the monopoly of the expertise of each group. Rather, we wanted to create a situation where we would literally need one another. And the escape room, if any of you ever experienced it, you know that you really need to work together to find the exit, to find that key. So in the series of workshops, which you can find out much more about in the published article on the basis of this research, we worked out different forms, different values that different regions of St. Petersburg represented. And we trained different professionals to pay attention and take care. We trained architects to pay attention to mobility, to migration patterns and identities of residents. We trained sociologists to notice form, volume, and connectivity of places that they work with. And we trained activists to work with politicians and city administrators in finding common language and common interest. So the program brought together in total 15 participants, ran for 1 year and 6 beautiful workshops in St. Petersburg. And unfortunately, the events of 2014 brought this international collaboration to a halt, and we stopped working in St. Petersburg since. I do not want to stand between you and the beautiful evening ahead of us, but I am here to answer any questions.
Thank you, Professor Sezneva, for this beautiful presentation and for this amazing work that you've done and keep doing, and also for giving us yet another viewpoint from which to analyze the concept of beauty. And I would invite the conference audience maybe to open a discussion and questions at dinner time, simply because we are a bit behind schedule and we have several guests who have come from outside to listen to the concert. And so I would postpone the discussion to this evening, okay? And thank you very much for this wonderful presentation.
We are about to begin the concert, so let me just introduce with a few words. I will do it in English because so that everybody who is participating at the conference can understand. So a conference which has been devoted from the very first moment to beauty and to harmony, particularly in architecture. But now it's time that we also participate into this contemplation of harmony that enters through the senses, other senses like the ears, because as not only Plato but also the Renaissance humanists in Italy and in many other parts of Europe used to say, harmony and beauty is an idea that we can reach through different senses. So today we were listening to very beautiful presentations and very meaningful also ideas. So now it's good, I think, to close this beautiful day with this moment. So Joost Willemze, I would like to begin by saying that he was a former student of our academy. He's one of the young students, as many others that you have seen here in these halls, that many years ago, I think it's already more than 12 years ago, he came very young, he was 17 years old, and he came to study Latin and Greek as part of the Humanities program of our academy. As you all know, this is an international academy for the humanities, so he was also a part of it. Already back then, he was already very good with his music, with his art, and he did this sort of two parallel journeys. So on one side, he devoted himself to literature and the humanities, not only classical literature, but also Russian literature and language. And on the other side, he was fully devoted also to music. He's still very young, but he became one of the most prominent harpists of his generation. He has been everywhere in the world. He has participated to many contests also, and have won many prizes and acknowledgements. So he's one, as I said, one of the most prominent harpists of his generation. And we are very happy that every year, at least twice a year, he comes here and shares with us his art and the thing in which he is so good at. I would also like to say two more things only to present to you, the harpist. First of all, that through this this communication between the arts that we try to foster here in our academy, and that Joost is a very good example of, he was able to prepare, I think it was 2 years ago, a very beautiful concert and spectacle that he proposed in Amsterdam, that it was based on the figure of Orpheus. Orpheus as this lyre player who had the ability to cast spells on the beasts and also on the gods. So he, with his expertise in ancient literature, was able to set up an anthology of ancient poets and to tell the story of Orpheus through both literature and music, taking, of course, compositions from many different ages that regarded this important figure of Orpheus. This concert won also the prize for young talents in the Netherlands, and we are planning to present this also here within, I hope, the next few months. The other thing that I was about to say is that just recently, a few months ago, he was able also to publish his second studio album, and it's called Rhapsodos. So also in the very title of this album, you can perceive this jointure of classical culture and music. And if anyone is interested, you have in the program, in the last page, you have the website where you can learn more about this album and in general about his art. So please welcome him with an applause.
It's always difficult to get the right tuning for the harp, especially if it's a warm hall and there are a lot of people and everything. I just played the Impromptu by Gabriel Fauré for you. Fauré was a composer who really loved the harp. Maybe you know his Requiem for orchestra and choir. And actually in the Sanctus and in Paradisum, there are beautiful harp parts. So he really knows how to use the harp in actually his orchestral works, but also in chamber music and even in solo music. So he wrote 2 solo pieces for the harp, and I just played for you the most famous one, the Impromptu, opus number 86. So the next pieces that I will play for you are connected to birds. Maybe you know that, well, birds have always appealed to composers, because of course even during the Fauré we heard the birds singing outside, and their song has always, well, been a big inspiration for composers. So actually I'm working on a program now with only music around that theme, and I will play a few of those pieces for you now. The first 2 ones actually are pieces from the French Baroque time, and well, so the first one is Rameau. Rameau was, well, he was working on in the court of at the court of Louis XIV, so the Sun King in Versailles. And the nice thing about the French Baroque is, opposed to the German, is that it's, well, of course the German Baroque and Bach, it's amazing, but the French Baroque, it's lighter and more playful, and there are even a lot of jokes often in the music. So that you will also hear in these two pieces. Le Rappel des Oiseaux, it's actually the call of birds. So you will hear the birds responding to each other. And after that I will play a piece by Daquin. He's a bit less famous than Rameau, but it's also the same time period. And it's called Le Coucou. And you will hear all the time, you will hear a minor third. And yeah, that's actually like the cuckoo, you know, and calling. So I will start off with those pieces. Russian, and the other one is, well, Hungarian and like German also. So first I will play the Lark by Glinka for Russian speakers. Javoronok is the name of the bird, and it's actually a song written for voice, and it has been transcribed for piano by Balakirov. He was a famous pianist, and it's also possible to play the piece on harp. Then after that, immediately after that, I will play the Rossignol, Il Rossignolo, I think also in Italian. Usignolo, right, which is the nightingale. And this is also, actually, this comes from another Russian song by Alyayev, not a very famous composer, but it's a beautiful song. And it has been transcribed in a virtuoso way by Liszt for the piano. And then there has been made an adaptation by Henriette Renaud, the famous harpist, for the harp. So you will hear now the lark and the nightingale. Liszt Chopin, it fits well together. And it's quite a challenge for me. It's the Harp Etude. So Chopin wrote 2 books of etudes for the piano. If you can play them all without a mistake, you are a master of the piano. But the first one of the second book has a nickname, the Harp Etude, because there's a melody with arpeggi on the harp, which are quite difficult to, also on the piano, it goes like this all the time. But I will be playing it on the harp, and then I will play an arrangement of the Moldau by Smetana, very famous composition of this Czech composer. Actually, it's better to say Vltava, that's the name of the river in the Czech language. And first you are hearing the springs, the first springs of the Moldau when it's like still a very small river. And then it will be flowing much more broadly. So it goes through the capital Prague, and also it's like a cruise on the Moldau. So we also passed castles and waterfalls and everything. So first Chopin, which is short, and then after that I will play the Moldau. so much. The Moldau is really one of the pieces I really love to play. The next piece is a contemporary piece, but it's very well and it's very good for the ears. So please, so it's a toccata by Connaisson, and well, it just has a very nice flow. So yeah, it's quite a nice piece. So I will play the toccata, which is, I think the piece is only like 10 or 15 years old, maybe only 10. And after that, I will play like a harp version of the Carnival of Venice. So, well, you all know Paganini probably, the big virtuoso on the violin. And he wrote this, well, actually he was, I think, the first one who made a set of variations on this, well, popular theme actually. Yeah, that's, like you would say, that's easy, you know, why play that? But of course, you can make the most devilish and difficult variations on that. And I will play the version of Godefroy, who was in the 19th century one of the, actually one of the first soloists on the harp. Of course, maybe that's nice to tell, the harp as an instrument is maybe one of the oldest there is. Well, first of course the voice, and then I think second and third are the harp and the flute. And well, actually imagine a hunter, you know, like who has a bow and an arrow. You know, when the arrow is being shot, then you hear actually some kind of pling from the harp. So then that's actually the idea of the arc. But through time it has developed a lot. And at some point, I mean, the piano, of course, you know, it has white and black keys. And the black keys are actually for, well, for the sharps and the, well, to make the sharps and the flats, to put it simply. And there was a long time, there was actually, well, the builders of the harp weren't sure how to transmit that system of making all these chromatic notes to the harp. Because, well, I can reach the lowest C, but we cannot span 47 more chords there, which are chromatic or something. And then at some point they invented the triple harp, which is still being played in Wales, for example, where you have on the outer side are the, well, like the white keys of the piano, so that's C natural, and then in the inner parts you have the sharps, the strings that you tune sharp and flat. But I mean, this is, you can imagine this is extremely complicated to play. So at some point in the end of the 18th century, like I think Hochbrücker in Germany came up with the idea of the pedal harp, where you change the pitch of a string by means of a pedal. So now the C string is C natural, all the red strings are C, and I'm going to press the pedal down now, and the C natural will become a C sharp. So that's the system that was developed back then. And what actually happens is that all the C strings become a little bit shorter, and when the string is made shorter, it sounds also a bit higher. So that's the system, and so for every string of the scale, so the C, D, E, F, G, A, B, I have 3 different positions. So I tune the harp in C flat, and then, so that's actually the, well, all the sharps and all the flats I am making by means of the pedals, and that makes the harp, of course, quite a intricate instrument. Well, why am I telling all this? I was going to play the Carnival de Venise by Godefroy, and so in the beginning of the 19th century, this system was being perfected. And so this type of harp really started to work, and well, for the musicians among you, you can imagine that if you have 3 positions per string, that you can actually, on the C string, have a flat, and on the B, so for example, the C string is a C flat, and the B string is a B natural. On the piano, that is actually the same key. So that means that we can make enharmonizations, we can make double tones on 2 strings at the same time. So, and that's actually an effect that the piano does not have. So a lot of virtuosos in that time, one of them, Godefroy, started to use all these effects on the harp. And the instrument became really, well, apt for big solo pieces and recitals. There was another one, Elias Pereshalvar. I'm not playing a piece of his today, but he also did a lot of, he toured Italy a lot. He was in Naples and, well, he was really a star back then. And actually he wrote a piece which is called La Mandoline, and he is also using this effect that on the E string there's the natural, and on the F string there's the flat. And then the piece goes a bit like this. So that's all these double tones. There have been a lot of, it was really the time of the virtuosic music, and you will hear that also in the carnival. But first I will play the toccata by Connaisson. Are there people here from the United States? Okay, great. And also from Colorado? Or close maybe. Well, I have a piece for you. It's called The Colorado Trail. It's actually like an American folk song from the beginning of the 20th century. And it has been arranged for harp by Marcel Drangeny, who was, well, a very French harpist. But around age 30, he emigrated to the US and he started to teach at the Juilliard School of Music. And throughout his life, like as it goes sometimes, like he really became more American than European. So this piece is really a nice blend of these two worlds. The Colorado Trail. lo sa ricordare.
Cuidado. Cuidado.
Bene, Latina. Es ultimum possum canal ultimum carmen, sed es, ergo est mio ultimum. Non est tam tantae velocitati, sed omnia haec, sed est vocatur the minstrels adjure to his native land, nunquam hoc verti in latinum antia, sed est tema sati simplex, et postea sunt variationes, et iam per longissimum tempus vocamo, et ita, est credo for bonum finem contentus. I've asked also colleagues of mine, like, well, how do you know, like when there's so much applause, what do you do? And they say, well, you just stand and bow. That's not always easy. But thank you so much for your attention. And well, if you have questions, I mean, I'm still here, so please feel free to ask anything. I'm always very, very happy and grateful to be here. Actually, I mean, I studied here when I was 17, from 17 to 18. It was still in Castel di Guido, so it was not here in Frascati. I've not been among the lucky ones who really were here for one entire year. But well, I'm really grateful for the friendship I have with the Academy, and that, well, I'm always welcome here, and that I can, well, I think almost twice a year I come back and give a concert. So, well, that's something extremely special for me. Thank you for being here and for, well, listening, and, well, hope to see you another time. Thank you very much.
Partecipazione al concerto di Joost, che si inserisce perfettamente non soltanto nel convegno che stiamo in questo momento celebrando sull'armonia dei luoghi e l'Humanitas, perché non si tratta, come abbiamo detto più volte durante questi giorni, solo dell'armonia dei luoghi esteriori. L'armonia dei luoghi esteriori si trasforma in un'armonia dei luoghi interiori. Nel terzo libro della Repubblica Platone dice che chi cambia i modi della musica può cambiare in privato e in pubblico ogni cosa, nel bene o nel male. Attraverso i vari toni che all'epoca di Platone venivano utilizzati anche nei teatri e nelle esibizioni musicali, si cercava, con una teoria che risaleva ai pitagorici, al canone pitagorico, di influire sull'anima. Si pensava che la musica fosse della stessa sostanza dell'anima e che penetrando attraverso le orecchie potesse modellare dall'interno l'anima al coraggio, alla virtù, alla giustizia, all'armonia, alla proporzione, all'equilibrio, alla ragione, oppure al caos. La stessa cosa succede nell'architettura. Noi possiamo, guardando ciò che ci sta attorno, o modellare la nostra anima verso la giustizia, la verità, la bellezza, come è stato detto bellamente e meravigliosamente dall'architetta, oppure possiamo vivere nel caos, in luoghi che non ci danno il senso della proporzione, non ci danno il senso della razionalità. Non è un caso che in latino ritmo si dica numerus e in greco la parola rythmos è affine alla parola arithmos, che vuol dire numero, perché non si tratta di quello che piace. Non è vero che è bello quel che piace, è vero che piace perché è bello. Il bello è un qualche cosa di oggettivo e di universale, ed è a quello che noi dobbiamo tendere, non alle cose belle che sono tante e molteplici e variabili e mutabili, ma ad una bellezza che è immutabile, assoluta ed eterna. Ed è per questo che noi qui cerchiamo di coltivare tutte le arti, la musica, ma anche la pittura, la scultura, la poesia, la filosofia, la letteratura, ogni arte, perché le arti nell'antichità venivano rappresentate come le muse o come le grazie, le quali sempre, voi lo vedete nei dipinti del Rinascimento o anche quelli dell'età barocca o quelli dell'età romantica, le muse e le grazie si tengono sempre per mano e danzano in cerchio. E questo è un simbolo meraviglioso, perché vuol dire che nessuna di queste artes quae humanitatem pertinent può vivere da sola. Bisogna collegarle l'una con l'altra, separarle con dei compartimenti stagni, con i settori scientifico-disciplinari, come dicono i dotti delle università. È un disastro per l'umanità, perché l'umanità non sente più l'unità dello spirito, non sente più che quello che fa lui con l'arpa e quello che fanno questi meravigliosi architetti con le loro penne e le loro matite quando immaginano una città migliore e quasi utopica nella quale noi possiamo vivere, sono la stessa cosa, sono l'umanizzazione dell'uomo. Ecco, è questo quello che il messaggio che questo ragazzo che studia poi anche la filosofia, studia la letteratura, che conosce la letteratura russa, la letteratura latina, la letteratura greca, la letteratura europea,
soprattutto l'Harp.
È laureato in letteratura russa, è laureato in letteratura latina e greca anche, e coltiva anche queste discipline, parla greco e latino con una grande scioltezza, e quindi noi ne siamo